U.S. President Donald Trump confirming that he's decertifying the nuclear agreement with Iran, effectively handing the decision on whether or not to pull out of it to Congress for now, adding, though, if we don't reach a deal over the future to review it, I can pull out of it. For more, let's cross now to our correspondent in Washington, Philip Crowther. Did he stick to the script, Donald Trump?
Well, pretty much, but then there is the tone from the US president, which was very, very aggressive toward Iran. We weren't exactly sure how he was going to describe the regime in Iran, but that's some tough stuff coming from the US president, and really not something we were used to during the previous administration, which was very much concentrating on getting the Iran nuclear deal approved by all the negotiating parties. Here are just a few examples. He describes Iran as a fanatical, rogue regime, a dictatorship, a state sponsor of terrorism. Then there is the crux of the matter, which is that he is decertifying the Iran nuclear deal. Now, that does not mean that he will withdraw from the Iran deal. He says, though, that he can terminate it at any moment. That is true. The US president can get out of that nuclear deal, can get the United States out of it. But what's important here from this speech is not just the relatively small matter of the nuclear deal, which remains alive. There is the matter of a completely changed and very aggressive policy toward Iran, with new sanctions being imposed on the Iranian Revolutionary Guard more than anything. A senior administration official just earlier told me that the actual Revolutionary Guard was going to be designated as a terrorist organization by the Treasury. This is an administration that really wants to make sure that Iran does not have that nuclear program, the nuclear capacity to put nuclear weapons on a ballistic missile. So it wants to work on both of those fronts and wants to be very hard on a regime that it says sponsors all sorts of terrorist organizations across the world. This was a very, very tough speech from US President Donald Trump towards Iran.
Rather, many thanks. And we're going to pick up on your last point there with our correspondent in Tehran, Reza Saya. Reza, the Treasury Department in the United States confirming those sanctions for the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. What reaction can we expect? What impact?
Yeah, we should point out that within the past hour, we got a text message from Iran's Ministry of Culture saying that it is likely that Iran's President Hassan Rouhani will deliver a statement at some point tonight in response to U.S. President Donald Trump's speech. We're going to look out for that in the next hour or two and bring that to you when that happens. Ever since he started his campaign for his presidency, Mr. Trump was out to pressure Iran and get rid of this nuclear deal. However, he had a big dilemma. Much of the international community, the UN Security Council, the U.S.'s European allies, the UN's nuclear watchdog, the IAEA, all of these groups, all of these governments, all of these leaderships told Mr. Trump not to do it, that the deal was working, that Iran was abiding by the terms of the deal. It seems as if Mr. Trump has found his solution, and that is not to go after the deal. Even though he decertified it, he's not going to call for nuclear sanctions. His solution seems to be going after Iran's Revolutionary Guard. In many ways, this is unprecedented. A UN member state designating a fellow UN member state branch of the military as a terrorist organization. We should point out that this designation is coming from the U.S. Treasury, which would be not as severe if it were. It won't be as severe because it didn't come from the State Department. If the designation came from the U.S. State Department, a much more punishing measure. Even so, we should point out that the Revolutionary Guard has direct and indirect ties to many sectors of the economy. The Iranian government's intention when signing this deal in 2015 was to get investment, international investment, Western investment. Moving forward, it's going to be very difficult, seemingly, for those European businesses, international businesses, to come do business in Iran and prove to the U.S. government that who they're doing business with is not linked to the Revolutionary Guard.
Reza Sayed will be checking in with you, of course, if the president of Iran, Hassan Rouhani, does indeed speak. Many thanks for that update from Tehran. And before we go from this special edition, just today we have other breaking news for you, and that is that France's former culture minister, Audrey Azoulay, has been voted as the next Director General of the UN's Education, Science and Culture Organization, UNESCO. She beat out Qatar's Hamad bin Abdulaziz Al Khawari in the final round of voting. We'll have more on that story with Tom Burgess-Watson at the top of the hour. Time now for the World This Week. It's the World This Week. 7 days, 4 Paris-based correspondents, 1 hour. The World This Week in partnership with the Daily Beast. Foreign editor Christopher Dickey joins us. How are you, sir?
Good. Anxious to talk about what happened in the last few minutes.
In the last few minutes in the White House. Also with us, Régis Le Sommier, Associated Editor-in-Chief for French newsweekly magazine Paris Match. How have you been?
Good.
All right.
Very good.
Also with Laure de Montville, Senior Correspondent for French daily newspaper Le Figaro. Welcome back. And Luke Baker, Paris Bureau Chief for the Reuters News Agency.
Good to be here.
Thanks for joining us. The World This Week on Facebook and Twitter. Hashtag World This Week. Criticize him if you will, but the President of the United States has once again proven his skills as a master of suspense after a week of build-up. Donald Trump announcing the Iran nuclear deal is the worst. He won't sign off on it. He's decertifying it. Not walking away, though. Instead, passing it over to Congress and announcing, Christopher Dickey, fresh sanctions on the Iranian Revolutionary Guards. Our Washington correspondent saying it wasn't so much what he said, but the tone that he employed.
Well, I think it's also what he said. When he threatened to pull out of the Iran nuclear deal on his own recognizance, as it were, I think that was pretty potent, especially since he says to Congress, if you don't come up with a deal that satisfies me, if you don't rearrange things to my satisfaction, this is what I'll do. That's not just tough talk. I mean, essentially the Revolutionary Guards, who he's trying to isolate and put to one side, they're going to take this as a good reason to get much tougher internally in Iran. The supreme leader of Iran, who always said to President Rouhani and others, you can't trust the Americans, they won't keep a deal, he will feel vindicated. And I think it's pretty clear that Iran will relaunch its nuclear program in fairly short order if this happens. And at the time it was stopped, they were less than a year away from nuclear weapons capability. So I don't really see what we get out of this deal in terms of nuclear Iran. I don't think we get much at all, and I think the dangers will be tremendous. When it comes to the question of the missiles, when it comes to the question of Iranian interference in the region, again, they do this because they feel it's necessary to their defense. We can disagree about that, but that's what the Revolutionary Guard interferes in all these countries to do, to protect Iran. That's why they run a large segment of Iraq now. That's why they do what they do to defend Bashar al-Assad in Syria. I don't know. I don't think Trump has the answers to that.
The Iran nuclear deal, Régis Le Sommier, was struck because they managed to keep the issue of building an atomic bomb separated from things like developing ballistic missiles, the militancy of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards. Trump putting it all in one box.
Well, all in one box, and even further than that. If you were listening to the first part of the speech, I was struck by his vision of Iran. Looked pretty much that he was stuck in the era of Khomeini. For instance, all what he mentioned about Iran being a rock state, sponsor of terrorism, was true, but that was true 20 years ago. I mean, the hotels in Beirut, and ever since that time, Iran has changed slightly, and it doesn't seem that Trump gets it. Not that the regime has changed its core elements. They are radical people, but take its Prime Minister President Rouhani. He was re-elected a second term, facing hardliners. that was a surprise, but the Iranian people re-elected a rather moderate president, and Trump seems to miss the point in all of that. Now, to talk about what's occurring on the ground in Syria and Iraq, certainly the Revolutionary Guards have a hand. They are, people like General Soleimani are key master of the plan over there, but look at what's going on the ground. There has not been many direct hit between the U.S.-sponsored rebels, for instance, or the Kurds, and the Iranians and and Bashar al-Assad in Syria. So there's a sharp difference between the rhetoric of Donald Trump towards Iran and what's actually happening on the ground over there. And it seems like, for instance, if you take Syria, the eastern part of Syria, it seems that the Euphrates is going to be the line, is going to be the separated line between, two parts of Syria, the Kurds in the north and the regime in the south. And that has not been, there hasn't been major, change.
Rival sides giving...
And the Iran Revolutionary Guard is really involved in terms of battlefield over there. And the U.S. is really involved too. So what I see there is it's a sharp difference between what's going on the ground and what Donald Trump is claiming Iran to be.
There's been reporting lors de Mondeville about Trump on this issue feuding with his own cabinet, with not just the Secretary of State, but also people inside his Defense Department.
That's right. Actually, Secretary of Defense Jim Mattis, I think a week ago, was in Congress talking about that, in front of the Congress and senators, and saying that they needed to keep this agreement. And actually, he managed to convince Trump, at least, that if he was going to decertify, they were going to, for now, keep this agreement. But I agree with what has been said, and also with what your correspondent in Washington said about the fact that the tone of the speech is extremely aggressive. It's dynamic in a way, and for me, it's disruptive too. And here we have I think a pattern of Trump's approach, which is that he thinks that what has been tried before doesn't work. And I would compare it with, his approach with North Korea, which is a very disruptive, very aggressive approach, saying if you're not going to comply, we'll have to get to the use of force. And here he's putting this Damocles sword, above the head of Iran's and above the head of Congress, saying if you don't act to sort of constrain Iran more in terms of its regional policies, in terms of its, the way they behave, and put more constraints on the future of this nuclear agreement, I will terminate the agreement. And this is pretty, pretty tough, because he's not only pushing Iran here around, but also the Congress. And what is interesting is that the Republicans are in a very difficult situation, because actually when you look back, the Republicans have been asking for that for a long time. And actually during the campaign, they asked for a toughening of the position. They voted this resolution.
On that hard stance now.
They backed off now, and I think there is this big debate in Congress. You have Corker, you have Senator Corker,
the chair of the Foreign Relations Committee,
exactly, in the Senate, who is actually putting together some kind of approach to, in a way, help Trump. But to what extent do they want to help him? Because at the same time, he's nearly at war with him in the press, as you know. Corker was actually saying that
a bit of
Trump,
a Twitter war the past
week. Big war, saying that maybe Trump was leading the U.S. to some kind of third world war.
I want to get back to something Régis Le Sommier said, which was this history lesson that we got at the outset of Donald Trump's remarks.
Aggression continues to this day. The regime remains the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism and provides assistance to Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, Hezbollah, Hamas, and other terrorist networks.
Luke Baker, what was your reaction?
Well, I mean, I think the critical thing here is that he's taken what was, in a way, a discrete problem. It was the issue of the Iran nuclear deal, and he's widened it out tremendously from one thing that was being dealt with. And in fact, everyone pretty much agreed that Iran was adhering to the deal and is not in any way, to any true form, violating it. He's widened that out to Iran's much wider behavior in the region, in Syria. Brought in Lebanon and Hezbollah, mentioned Hamas, which brings in Palestinian territories, and Israel to an extent. So he's created, if you like...
But he also mentioned Al-Qaeda.
And then he mentioned Al-Qaeda. Well,
which is a sworn enemy of Iran.
Oh, yeah, well, it's a confusion, but as we've often heard from Trump, he almost thrives on that sort of confusion. But what I think he's done, which is potentially quite dangerous, is taken something that they thought they had a system in place for dealing with it. They had the Iran nuclear deal. Whatever the limitations were, they had a specific sort of framework in which to deal with them, and he's gone and broadened this into a whole mishmash of things, which bring in other countries in the region.
Which some of them is completely false. Like Iran was on the side of the coalition in 2001 during the Afghanistan invasion. They offered to have base on their territory in order to strike the Taliban. So that's not true. Another thing is the link between Al-Qaeda and Iran. Iran may have played Al-Qaeda in a number of ways, but like everybody did in the region, actually, the only thing we know for sure is that Zarqawi left Afghanistan through Iran in order to settle in northern Iraq, when he had his group called Ansar al-Islam at the beginning, under Saddam. So he made that trip through Iran, so he was able to use their territory. But, only this detail doesn't make Iran a sponsor of Al-Qaeda or the two linked together.
Look, the secret services work this way all the time. They cut little deals to move people around. Not only the Iranian secret services.
Yeah.
I mean, the CIA used to have an intimate relationship with the man who was behind the Munich Olympics massacre. I mean, this is a matter of the dark world of intelligence. It's how they operate. To then say that this is Iran sponsoring 9/11, to act as if Iran is behind the bombing of the embassies in Tanzania and Kenya is totally nuts. But he doesn't care because he knows his base doesn't know and doesn't care. It all sounds good to them.
But we remember 2003 when George W. Bush linked Saddam Hussein to...
Well, actually, he didn't, but he allowed everybody around him to do that. And that was part of the reason that we went to war in Iraq.
Also,
in 2004, a majority of Republicans were still convinced that Saddam was behind 9/11.
And does anybody know about the restaurant in D.C. that was
there was a plot to assassinate the Saudi there.
By the Iranians?
By the Iranians,
Okay.
I mean, the Saudis and the Israelis are going to be very excited about what was said here, and that it introduces a whole host of unpredictables that are, if you like, a distraction away from the Iran nuclear deal, and whatever problems there may spring from that. It brings in North Korea, which is, in many respects, a more pressing and immediate nuclear threat. But if you're going to deal, as he kept iterating as well at the same time, that we have to stop Iran developing nuclear weapons and a nuclear capability, he's suddenly sort of introduced other ingredients into the mix that are absolutely, in a way, nothing to do with that.
That's true, and it's the realignment. I think is very clear that the position is actually very close to the Israeli position and the Gulf countries' positions. But I think it's.
So what is it? Is it the Likud hardliners in Israel that are dictating his foreign policy?
I don't know exactly. But it's striking that there are commonalities here. At the same time, one has to add that that some of the things that he's saying he's not the only one to say there is a problem with Iran. I mean, when he's going after the regime or going after Iran, he's not the only one. When you listen to Macron's interview with CNN at the United Nations, he acknowledges that he agrees in a way that there are things which have to be dealt with apart from the nuclear deal. He says we have to deal with the missile, the problem of the missile.
Laure de Mondeville, I'm going to interrupt you because we're going to cross over to European Union headquarters. Federica Mogherini was one of the negotiators of that Iran nuclear deal, is speaking.
civilian purposes only. We cannot afford, as international community, as Europe for sure, to dismantle a nuclear agreement that is working and delivering, especially now. The International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, has verified 8 times that Iran is implementing all its nuclear-related commitments, following a comprehensive and strict monitoring system. There have been no violations of any of the commitments included in the agreement. The scope of the agreement relates to the nuclear program and is being fulfilled. The deal has prevented and continues to prevent, will continue to prevent, Iran from developing nuclear weapons. The Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action represents a key and functioning pillar of the international non-proliferation architecture that is even more important to preserve at a time of acute nuclear threat. We believe we have a collective responsibility to preserve it for our own collective security. The United States domestic process, and I underline domestic, following today's announcement of President Trump, is now in the hands of the United States Congress. The JCPOA is not a domestic issue, but a UN Security Council resolution. The international community and the European Union with it has clearly indicated that the deal is and will continue to be in place. The European Union continues to fully support the Iran nuclear deal and the full and strict implementation of all its provisions by all parties. The European Union, together with the rest of the international community, is committed to preserve it to the benefit of all, including the Iranian people.
Thank you very much. A couple of questions. Lawrence?
All right, there you heard strong words there from Federica Mogherini. You're watching a special edition of The World This Week. And we're joined at this point by Sanam Chantier.
Mr. Trump can terminate the deal. You just said he cannot. He just said he
Involved.
can.
Not quickly, apparently. If you could cut a little bit the sound, please. Otherwise, I'm competing against the questions. Nope, it's still on there.
Comes to you in January or February.
All right, well, I hope that we can resolve that. Hello, Sanam. Before we cross to you, I just want to get reaction from the panel, and hopefully this sound issue can be resolved with the issue. There we go. That's it. Thank you very much. Christopher Dickey, strong words there from Federica Mogherini, saying some of this is domestic.
No, she emphasized domestic. Look, Trump traps himself all the time because he made all these outrageous promises during his campaign, and now he wants to be seen to keep all of his promises, even if they make no sense at all. That's part of what's going on here. But the other thing that everybody knows who was involved with this is that, let's put aside the European Union. 2 other parties to this deal are Russia and China. They are not going to climb on board with this. They have huge investments, a huge stake in Iran, and they're going to keep it.
Yeah, this is a very, outspoken statement of unilateralism. Effectively, you've changed the terms of the deal with Iran. You've isolated allies in Europe, the Germans, the French, Britain potentially, Russia, China, or allies from the Security Council, and you're going it alone while widening the issue in quite dangerous ways. I see it as really something that is, tub thumping in that respect.
Trump is great at breaking deals, at throwing them up, tearing them up, kicking them down the road. I haven't seen Trump make any deals yet as president, not a single one.
His book was called The Art of the Deal.
Yeah, written by somebody else who now says he was a lunatic.
The art of undoing the deals.
Yeah.
Sanam Chantier, our correspondent in Tehran, saying we may hear from the Iranian president. What have been the reactions you've seen so far?
Indeed, but the key players, with the exception of Federica Mogherini, have been very slow to flock to social media. But just before Trump made that statement, we heard from, via Twitter, Abbas Aslani, who is a journalist who works for Iran's hardline outlet Tasnim. I'm hoping that tweet's going to come up at some point. He's quoting an Iranian foreign ministry spokesperson saying Iran's Revolutionary Guards are supported by different walks of life in Iran. Whether that's true is debatable. Any measure against the forces will face Iran's proportionate and strong reaction. Now, reactions from ordinary Iranians have been much stronger than that. And I have one tweet that really, for me, encapsulates what they're feeling over there. Now, this one comes from Hossein Bastani, and it's a case of the Iranians being very concerned, those that I've been speaking to, concerned about once again being isolated from the international community, the possibility of reimposition of sanctions. And the tweet says, "My mother in Tehran is having an invasive heart surgery today." In Farsi it says, "I called to check up on her one last time before she went into theatre. I asked how she was. She responded with, 'Tell me, what happened to the deal?'" That's very telling of what's going on in Iran. Now, looking beyond social media, I've been monitoring opinion pieces that we've been showered with ahead of this. And also, it's very much reminiscent for me of what we were seeing ahead of the nuclear deal being clinched. This one is, of course, by Ben Rhodes, foreign policy advisor of Barack Obama, entitled "Unmasking Trump's Iran."
If you don't read the words, you get the idea with the pictures.
Absolutely. I'm going to, if I can scroll down this, we have a slightly archaic computer here. The picture itself is very telling. You can see Donald Trump here with the fire coming out of his head. And his big message is that Donald Trump is going ahead with a dishonest and unnecessary step that will isolate the US and could lead to war. On the other end of the spectrum, and we've talked about this, is of course Mark Dubowitz. Now, some people may not be familiar with this name. Mark Dubowitz is the head of the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, the FDD, who is currently at the helm of Trump's Iran and sanctions policy. And of course, he is what we can call an Iran hawk. And he leads with decertify, pressure, and fix. Of course, Iranians will at no point agree to that. Decertifying the deal is the first step toward fixing its severe deficiencies that place Iran on a North Korean-style path to developing nuclear weapons. So two polar opposites there, saying it how that it is from their own perspective.
And I just want to get back to what you said a minute ago about that woman who's going into surgery. Of course, the deal was struck in 2015. You covered for us the Iranian presidential election where Hassan Rouhani was re-elected. People growing impatient, feeling...
Also, there was a problem of mismanagement with the Iranian administration. They didn't prepare the country for the fact that lifting sanctions and improvement with the economy, employment pouring in, is going to take not weeks, not months, but years of work. And there is a sense of disappointment, but what I experienced, especially because I go back and forth to Iran every few months, the feeling that I get is at least people are happy with the fact, and that's why they voted for President Rouhani, was because he embarked on a moderate role to establish a détente with the international community, and that's what they want.
And so the Treasury confirming that there's going to be those sanctions on the Revolutionary Guards, what impact is it going to have on ordinary
We expected this. We've heard rhetoric from the Iranians prior to the statement saying that they will react proportionately. We'll just have to wait and see, François. I can't double guess that.
Right.
The Iranians are at times as unpredictable as the Americans.
Sanam Chantier, many thanks for that. I want to turn to our panel now and pick up on something that Luke Baker said a moment ago about the unilateralism of it. Luke, there was also this other aspect of it, which was, of course, on the eve of the announcement, Trump announcing that the United States was pulling out of UNESCO.
Well, exactly. And UNESCO was the latest in a series of international agreements that the United States has effectively withdrawn from, whether it's the Paris Climate Accord, whether it's now sort of effectively abrogating or sort of decertifying the Iran nuclear deal, throwing sort of, if you like, geopolitical hand grenades into the mix of international discussions, and the danger with that and this sort of America First policy is that while it may, as Chris referred to, it plays in a lot of ways to Trump's base and, the Make America Great Again or Put America First, it really does wreak havoc in a world that is clearly multilateral on so many issues and certainly on sensitive international agreements like this. And climate change actually is equally important. There are certain problems in the world that can only be resolved through a multilateral approach. I think pretty much everyone would agree with that, apart from at this stage the Trump administration, and that's dangerous.
Pulling out of UNESCO is just the latest move that disengages the United States from multilateral bodies and treaties. Put into practice, his America First policies have included the Trans-Pacific Trade Partnership deal. That was scrapped. Proposed cut in the State Department and in foreign aid, withdrawal from the Paris Climate Change Agreement, as you were saying, and now, of course, the latest UNESCO. Of course, it's not over. There could be more to come. The Canadian Prime Minister was at the White House this week as Trump tries to renegotiate the North American Free Trade Agreement. A fourth round of talks on that score got underway on Wednesday. Justin Trudeau following up that visit with a state visit to neighboring Mexico. Mexico, whose economy minister says NAFTA will still regulate trade between his country and Canada with or without the United States, Laure de Mondeville.
So, yeah, this is, I mean, as has been said before, he's putting into practice what he has promised, which is, and I think concerning the NAFTA deal, I think it's one of the most important goals of Trump. I mean, one should never forget that for him, reindustrialize, I mean, bring back the factories, protect, employment in the U.S., renegotiate these deals. It's one of the core issues of his whole campaign. And I think a lot of things, I mean, the agreement on climate is subordinated to that. And most of what he's doing is actually in place with that. He denies that it's unilateralism. He just says that it's, bargaining between sovereign states. That's what he says. But what is interesting, I think, is that if we go back to this idea of Iran and everything, what is interesting is that Trump is trying to deal with issues which some of them are real. I didn't finish what I was saying earlier, but the behavior of Iran in the region is real. The problem is that at this moment in time, he has no coalition behind him internationally, neither internally, to take on such huge and dangerous and risky tasks.
And also, I don't think the right now, as of now, the U.S. has the means to isolate Iran as it used to have.
Exactly.
That's one of the main problems. But to go back to what you just said about undoing things, I think there's a particular way of Trump of trying to undo what Obama did, especially Obama. Not
that's his fixation.
Yes, as if it all goes back to that White House correspondent dinner where Obama mocked him and he said, "I'm gonna beat you. And then I'm gonna take down everything that you did." There's something truly personal, it seems, because when you look at things, the nuclear deal was one of maybe the greatest accomplishment Obama did during his, because. Let's put it that way. Iran, has a tendency to be a dictatorship and rock nation behavior. But Iran, above all, I think, has this will of becoming a regional power and to be recognized as such, and taking these moves in order to create and to portray Iran as a worldwide threat is, I think, completely insane.
What is Iran going to do to defend itself? It's going to relaunch its nuclear program, and it'll get even more aggressive with its neighbors.
Yeah.
It now has to have Iraq completely under its tutelage. It's close to that already.
Yeah.
It'll be further. Same with Syria. It will open up a corridor. It's already opening up a corridor all the way through Iraq to Lebanon, to the Israeli border.
Exactly.
All of that's going to go on, and it's going to go on in spades now.
And that's exactly.
And the U.S. has no means. The U.S. is withdrawing.
And what is the U.S. going to do? The U.S. spent year after year, the U.S. tried to isolate Iran, tried to pressure Iran. All that happened was that Iran advanced dramatically with its nuclear program, and the U.S. was powerless to stop it until it was able to get Russia, China, Germany, and the other members of the Security Council on board. That's when action was taken. Trump can't do that. Trump can't begin to do that.
But and when you mention, Iran's activities in Syria, but pushing through into Lebanon as well, it's backing with Hezbollah and potentially maybe with Hamas. Obviously, you open up, all sorts of other fronts. Russia's also involved. Sure. Let's see. So, where are we going to end up with, for example, with Hezbollah in Lebanon? What does Israel do in response if the United States really does want to go after Hezbollah there? What does Russia do if there's,
Hezbollah is not limited to Lebanon. It's an international organization now. It goes all the way to Yemen, Iraq. It intervenes everywhere. So how do you deal with such a powerful organization? Are you going to, put sanction on Hezbollah? How is this going to work out?
And if you do that, you need to have international cooperation to do it.
Yeah, on board.
Need to have international cooperation. Luke, your former Jerusalem correspondent, does Israel, at this point, 2 years on, still want to tear up the deal?
Look, I've just moved here a month ago from Jerusalem, and I think there are certainly voices within the Israeli government that have been very clear and strong about the need to. Initially they would want to have torn up the agreement. Then they started to adjust some of their thinking quite a bit and say, there are lots of things wrong with this agreement, but we would much rather try and find ways of reopening parts of it and strengthening it in other areas. I think many people who often don't go on the record, but would say that they recognize this deal is achieving some success. And while the sunset clauses are a worry, effectively it is limiting Iran's capability of developing a nuclear weapon. From Israel around Netanyahu, there are people that think will say that we want it torn up, but really we quite like it just tightened and strengthened. They will find positives in what Trump said today, I think, saying, he's decertifying it. That shows that he also has clear problems with it. Maybe we can find other ways to put pressure on Iran. But I think it opens up a hornet's nest. And I think, there will be people, former Israeli officials, former Israeli generals who've already come out and said, look, we want to be very cautious about reopening this deal because that could really blow up in our faces.
All right, final word on this point. It's the cover of this week's Economist, the world's most powerful man. This is more in relation to next week when there's going to be the Chinese Communist Party Congress where Xi Jinping is going to solidify his grip on power. The multilateral world that Barack Obama espoused, what's happening to it, though?
Trump's destroying it, and other people are trying to take leadership of it. Notably, Xi Jinping, when he spoke at Davos in January, he was very clear about that. Basically, he said, I'm here in this international forum, and we are going to show you the way forward in the world, we Chinese, while Trump is off doing whatever it is he's doing. And I think that that's going to be a pattern again and again and again, that people are looking for alternative leaders, and there are a number of people who are willing to step forward. Hell, that's what Putin is trying to do. I don't think he'll be able to do it, but Xi Jinping is in a position to do it with a huge part of the global economy.
So much more to talk about on this matter, and of course we'll continue to follow it. A few of the other stories we've been following for you this week. Harvey Weinstein's secret is out. The 65-year-old Hollywood mogul who is accused in a growing number of sexual assault cases. Weinstein, who along with his brother lorded over art house cinema for decades, with films that have won more than 80 Academy Awards, undone by an investigative report that replays a New York City police wiretap of a 22-year-old model, Ambra Batalina Gutierrez, resisting his advances. Since then, the allegations have swelled.
I pulled my arm away, finally, and headed to the door. He started following me and telling me that he could introduce me to Bob Weinstein and that I could get a 3-picture deal and that he would greenlight my script. But I had to watch him masturbate.
Laure de Mondeville, that's only part of it.
Actually, I read before I came, I read the whole piece, I think, which is the most important one, that is in the New Yorker by
Ronan Farrow,
who is the son of Woody Allen and Maya Farrow.
Not the son of Woody Allen, but he's the son of
No,
Mia
he's
Farrow.
not. Yes, the son of Maya Farrow, and Woody Allen was his father-in-law, right? And so it's absolutely stunning. You have to read that to understand the case Weinstein, and the extent of this. I would say the sickness of this guy who was a predator. Sexual predator in the full sense of the word for 30 years. And what is very fascinating in the piece is that he shows that it's not only about Harvey Weinstein, but it's also about the whole system of, a culture of silence, of acceptance of this situation. And because there is so much money at stake, there is power at stake. There is also the world of Hollywood, which is all about young actresses coming to try to make a career and not having the capacity and to actually resist this awful pressure. It's very impressive.
Harvey Weinstein did not invent the casting couch. It existed long before him.
Yes.
Régis Le Sommier, he was a mainstay at Cannes. Is the media to a certain degree complicit? Because I've heard those stories before, and so have you.
You've heard the stories about Harvey Weinstein before?
Yes.
I mean, we've all heard a little bit of this, but not to the extent we're discovering today. However, the stories in Cannes, involving cocaine and and sort of like lewd parties and everything. I think you're right to referring that a man on his own, however powerful he is, or because he's powerful, he's able to deploy around him a system where you have people that are bringing the girls in. You have girls that come willingly, and then you have girls that it's how it talking about that piece. It was. When an actress would come to Cannes, it was on the list of what she had to do a day. It was, you had a photo call, then you had various interview, and at one point you would have meeting with Mr. Weinstein in his room, as if it was an activity, daily activity, and that was creating a part of the system. The other part of the system was a number of people around him that would say to young actress who felt threatened, "Don't worry." That you just please keep silent. If you keep silence, you'll have a career.
And then there is the money. The money.
And
because
the money
you have all these. The agreements that the New York Times has sort of put in the news, which is that actually they forced these girls to take money. They would take money in these agreements of confidentiality, and so that means that the whole company was actually aware of this whole thing. And now even his brother is denying that he knew. But what is coming out is that actually the piece in the New York Times seems to have been sort of nurtured by the brother in order to prevent the piece, which is much more stronger, the one of the New Yorker. Damning.
I mean, clearly this issue isn't new. It's been around for a long time. But the thing is, we live in an age where people can record conversations. They set up a wiretap, right? In the New Yorker piece, there was the recording comes from an actress who effectively went back into to see the Weinstein the next night, and then has recorded him on tape sort of making these advances. But I think one of the things I read today, which is interesting, is there now is apparently a spreadsheet circulating in Hollywood and elsewhere with lists of all actors who have allegedly made advances on women or done sexually harassed things or sort of or sexual abuse. And the danger there, I think, is that is apparently spreading amongst journalists. At some point, some of it will leak out, but a lot of it may be unsubstantiated. What seems to be clear in the Weinstein case is that an awful lot of evidence was gathered, and processes have opened in London and New York, right? So that's one thing. But there is a danger as well. This becomes a
there is, and I think there is something. I'm sorry. There is something about these issues which is, I think, fascinating from the French point of view. Is that in America, the sex issue can never be dissociated from the Puritan past. So in fact, there is this willingness at some point. There is this huge hypocrisy in America and this Hollywood world, which was on the left, by the way, and which criticized Donald Trump. And actually, this guy was doing exactly the same. And at the same time, there is this idea that we're going to expiate by having this guy. He's going to be crucified, and we'll get rid of the whole thing. But actually, it's much more complicated.
Once you get the goods on somebody for crimes or alleged crimes like this, it doesn't stop, as we saw in France with Dominique Strauss-Kahn.
And in both cases, it's the New York City Police Department that had a role to play.
That's right. The New York City Police, the special victims unit came in and focused on both of them. And in both cases, by the way, the district attorney, Cy Vance, folded and didn't prosecute.
Also for Weinstein, actually.
Yeah. So yes. I think that the once you open this door in a world where this kind of practice is rampant, it's going to go on. And because it's Hollywood, it's not going to stop with Harvey Weinstein. It's going to go on and on and on because these casting couch stories are wonderfully prurient and people want to read them and they want to believe them, and a lot of them are true.
But there is, as Laure was saying, this political aspect to it, which is the Republicans were in the hot seat when it was top brass at Fox News that was forced out by sex scandals.
How about the President of the United States? He was grabbing something, wasn't he?
Well, I think
in this case, though,
Weinstein took part in the protest.
Exactly.
Protest.
He did. He
There's a
actually
lot of
demonstrated
against Trump.
women.
No, but in this case, there is the question: Hillary Clinton, the Obamas must have known when they took his money, when they took his donation.
You think that Obama
What
had
about
his
Bill
daughter?
Clinton?
You think Obama sent his daughter to be an intern with him, knowing that? I don't think so. They may have heard the rumors, but I don't think necessarily that the world of the Obamas is one where people shared those rumors.
But you raise an interesting point. We are now into, here's a story that is clearly, let's remember the focus is on women who've been sexually, attacked in some cases by Harvey Weinstein. It now runs the risk of becoming a politically polarized fight with Breitbart News saying, well, come on, it's the Democrats and Harvey Weinstein who are up to this sort of thing, and others saying, well, no, it's other side on the Republican
and also,
side.
as one of my female colleagues said, so now we're hearing from all these women who are saying, my career would have gone further if I had only done this with Harvey Weinstein.
Yeah.
Then you ask, well, wait a minute, how about the ones whose careers did go far with Harvey Weinstein?
Yeah, they're going to be suspect.
Well, yeah, then they'll be suspect too.
wrongdoing.
It is a cloud over everyone.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Unfortunately, the running out of time. But I want to thank Christopher Dickey, Laure de Mondeville, Régis Le Sommier, Luke Baker. I want to thank you for being with us here in The World This Week.